I was 59 years old the night I finally sat down to record my story, and even now my hands tremble remembering it. My name is Michael Harrison, born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina. For most of my adult life, I was a man of deep faith, a man who believed with all his heart in an institution that claimed to speak for God. I believed in it so fiercely that I built my whole life around it. My marriage, my friendships, even my sense of self. And then, one night almost 20 years ago, I stumbled into a secret that shattered everything. When I was 21, in 1982, I was baptized into what we simply called the Fellowship. It wasn't some fringe sect, not to me anyway. It was respectable, organized, nationwide. If you grew up in the South, you probably knew someone in it. We weren't like the Baptists down the road or the Catholics across town. We believed we had the real truth. We said the world was about to end and only those who remained pure inside the Fellowship would survive. That belief, it gave me direction when I was young. My parents were decent but tired people. Dad worked third shift at a textile plant until the mills shut down. Mom sewed hems at home just to pay the power bill. Church on Sunday wasn't enough for me. I wanted meaning. I wanted answers. So when two clean-cut young men knocked on our door one spring afternoon, holding out a glossy magazine with words like, "Hope for a Dying World," I let them in. The Fellowship had a way of making you feel like you were part of something global, something unstoppable. Every meeting started on the dot. Every scripture was cross-referenced. Every answer was rehearsed until it sounded like divine wisdom. And for a long time, I ate it up. By 1987, I was what they called a ministerial servant, one step below elder. I wore pressed white shirts, carried my Bible in a worn leather case, and spoke in living rooms all over Greenville County about the day when the wicked would be swept away and only the righteous would remain. At 28, I was appointed as an elder. That title carried weight. In a congregation of 80 people, I was suddenly a counselor, a marriage mediator, a spiritual father. People came to me when their kids rebelled, when their husbands drank too much, when depression made them want to quit life. I believed I was serving God. I believed the Fellowship was spotless. But life has a way of testing convictions. In 1995, a new elder moved to our congregation. His name was Richard Allen, though everyone called him Brother Allen. He had been in the movement for over 20 years and transferred down from a big congregation in Charlotte. Tall, polished, charismatic. The kind of man who knew how to quote a scripture in Greek, then smile in a way that made you feel small for never having studied Greek yourself. He was respected immediately. Within months, the regional overseer appointed him coordinator of elders, a role I'd secretly hoped to earn someday. I told myself I didn't mind. After all, if God chose him, who was I to question it? At first, I admired him. His prayers sounded like poetry. His speeches could make a room of 200 people cry. But then I began to notice cracks, small things, the sort of details you'd only see if you were close. His wife, Claudia, was 39, a pale woman with shadows under her eyes. She rarely spoke during meetings. When she did, her voice wavered like someone coming out of a long sleep. Their daughter, Emily, was 12 when they arrived, bright eyes, chestnut hair, but a sadness I couldn't quite name. She sat hunched between her parents, never raising her hand, never laughing the way a girl her age should. One Saturday morning, during door-to-door work, I was paired with Emily. It was a cool spring day, and we'd only gone 2 houses when she suddenly collapsed on the sidewalk. Her body went limp like a marionette cut from its strings. I knelt beside her, panicked, while the homeowner fetched water. When she came to, her eyes darted everywhere but mine. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Please don't tell my dad." That sentence, that fear, it crawled under my skin and stayed there. I started paying closer attention. Claudia was always drowsy, glassy-eyed. "Migraines," she'd say. "My husband gives me medicine." Emily flinched whenever Richard put a hand on her shoulder. I told myself I was imagining things. That doubt was from the devil. That's what the Fellowship taught us. Never accuse an elder. Never doubt the men God has appointed. And then one evening in 1997, after a Thursday meeting, I went back inside the Kingdom Hall to grab my forgotten Bible. Passing the elder's office, I heard Richard's voice through the door. His tone was nothing like the gentle cadence he used in public. It was sharp, threatening. "I told you, if you keep asking questions, you'll regret it. You don't know who you're dealing with." I froze in the hallway. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Who was he talking to? And what kind of man of God speaks like that? I should have walked away. I should have convinced myself it was nothing. That would have been safer. But I couldn't unhear the menace in his voice. A few weeks later, I saw something that ripped away every layer of denial. I'd arrived early at the hall to set up microphones. The building was empty, or so I thought. From the elder's office came muffled sobs. I pressed my ear to the door and recognized Emily's voice. I knocked. The silence that followed stretched so long I thought my heart might give out. Then the door cracked open, and Richard stood there, his smile taut, his eyes cold. Behind him, I glimpsed Emily's face, red, tear-streaked, her fists clenched in her lap. "She's just dealing with teenage struggles," Richard said smoothly. "Nothing a father's guidance and scripture can't fix." Emily's eyes met mine for a fleeting second. They screamed a word she didn't dare say: help. That night, lying in bed beside my sleeping wife, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every warning sign. The pills, the bruises I'd seen once on Emily's wrist, the way Claudia stumbled like she was drugged. My father's words echoed back from years earlier, when he'd warned me not to let religion blind me to common sense. If you ever find out these men aren't who they say they are, have the guts to walk away. But walking away wasn't enough anymore. Someone's life, maybe two lives, hung in the balance. I wish I could tell you I acted immediately. I didn't. I wrestled with fear for weeks. Fear of losing my standing. Fear of being labeled an apostate. Fear of being wrong. But fear is a poor excuse when a child looks you in the eye and silently begs for rescue. The night came when Emily couldn't hold it in anymore. We were paired again for field service, standing under a blooming dogwood tree while the rest of the group moved on. Her voice shook as she asked, "Brother Harrison, if I told you something terrible, would you promise not to abandon me?" I swallowed hard. "You can tell me anything." And with tears carving rivers down her cheeks, she whispered the words that destroyed every illusion I had about the fellowship, about God, about myself. "My dad hurts me. He's been hurting me for years, and he says no one will believe me because he's an elder." The world tilted beneath my feet. I remember gripping the bark of that tree just to stay upright. I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. Before I continue, I want to ask you something, not as a preacher, not as a storyteller, but as a man who's carried this truth for too long. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. It reminds me I'm not speaking into the dark alone. And if this story touches you, please like the video and subscribe. That's how I'll know it's worth continuing, that these memories aren't wasted. The moment those words left Emily's lips, "My dad hurts me," something inside me broke. It wasn't just anger, it wasn't just disbelief. It was a sickening cocktail of rage, fear, and a grief so heavy it made my knees weak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her I believed her, that she wasn't alone, that I'd burn the whole fellowship to the ground before I let her suffer another day. But all that came out was a shaky whisper. "Emily, tell me everything." She glanced around the quiet street as if the trees themselves might be listening. Her hands twisted the hem of her skirt, knuckles white. "He started when I was 10. At first he said it was special affection. Then it got worse and worse. He says if I ever tell anyone, they'll call me a liar. They'll say I'm trying to ruin his reputation. He says God will punish me." I felt bile rise in my throat. A 12-year-old girl should have been worried about middle school dances, about math homework, about braces, not carrying a secret like this. "And your mom?" I asked softly. Her eyes clouded. "She doesn't see anything. He gives her pills every day. She sleeps through everything. Sometimes I try to wake her up, but she never wakes up." That detail hit me like a hammer. The migraines, the endless drowsiness. Of course, he wasn't just abusing Emily. He was drugging his wife to keep her blind. I fought the urge to run straight to Richard's house and drag him out by the throat. But I knew I had to be careful. The fellowship protected its elders like royalty. If I accused him without proof, they'd call me slanderous, even apostate. I'd lose everything, my standing, my family, maybe even my marriage. But what was that compared to the safety of a child? I made Emily a promise right there beneath the dogwood tree. I believe you, and I swear to you I'll protect you. No matter what it costs me. She sobbed into her hands, her whole body shaking. For the first time, she let me hug her, not the stiff, formal handshake the fellowship encouraged, but a real embrace, a father's embrace. The next days were torment, at work, at home, at the grocery store. My mind never left Emily's words. I started noticing more details that had slipped past me before. The way Claudia's hands trembled when she held her songbook. The way Richard touched Emily's shoulder and she froze like prey, sensing a predator. One evening, I drove past their house on a quiet cul-de-sac lined with maple trees. Their curtains were drawn tight, but through a narrow gap I saw Claudia slumped at the kitchen table, her chin resting on her chest, unmoving. Emily walked by carrying plates, her posture stiff, mechanical. Richard sat at the head of the table, scrolling through notes for his next sermon, as if nothing were wrong. I gripped the steering wheel until my palms ached. That night, lying awake, I remembered something my father once told me before cancer took him. Son, never confuse God with the men who claim to speak for him. If you ever have to choose between protecting a child and protecting a church, choose the child. Those words became my compass. But knowing the truth and acting on it are two different battles. Inside the fellowship, elders were taught to wait on God. If a brother sinned, God would expose him in his time. Our role was to keep order, maintain unity, and never bring reproach on the organization. That was their favorite word, reproach. It meant scandal, bad press, lawsuits. The fellowship cared about its image more than it cared about flesh and blood people. I'd seen it before in smaller ways. A woman beaten by her husband told to endure so the neighbors wouldn't speak badly of the congregation. A teenager caught sneaking cigarettes shamed publicly while his father, an elder, was quietly protected. The message was always the same: protect the reputation of the fellowship above all. But this wasn't a cigarette. This wasn't gossip. This was a child's life. I knew I needed proof. So the next Saturday, while out in the ministry, I carefully asked Emily if she'd ever seen the pills her father gave her mother. She nodded cautiously. They're small and blue. He keeps them in a jar in the bathroom cabinet. No label. Emily, I whispered, if you ever get a chance, I need you to save me one. Just one. Can you do that? Her eyes widened with fear. What if he finds out? Then we'll be careful. Just one pill. It could be the key to stopping him. 3 days later, she slipped a folded piece of notebook paper into my palm before the Tuesday night meeting. Inside were 2 tiny blue tablets. My chest tightened. She'd risked everything to get them. The next morning, I drove to a pharmacy in downtown Greenville. The pharmacist, an old family friend, squinted at the pills. This here's diazepam, Valium, 10 milligrams. Strong stuff. If someone's taking this daily, they'd be sedated most of the time. Dangerous without a prescription. My stomach churned. Claudia hadn't been battling migraines. She'd been poisoned into oblivion. Now I had evidence. Now I had no excuse to stay silent. But silence was exactly what the fellowship demanded. That Thursday, after the congregation meeting, the elders gathered in our office. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across our Bibles. I cleared my throat, my hands clammy. Brothers, I began. I believe we should review the guidelines on elder visits with families, especially with minors present. I've noticed some irregularities. Richard's eyes cut to mine, sharp as glass. What irregularities, Brother Harrison? I swallowed hard. I just think it's wise to always have 2 elders present when counseling young people, to avoid misunderstandings. That's unnecessary, he replied smoothly. Some situations require privacy. I have experience handling delicate matters. Unless you doubt my judgment. The other elders shifted uncomfortably. Brother Sanders, the oldest, cleared his throat. Actually, the branch letter last year encouraged pairs for visits. Michael might have a point. For the first time, Richard's polished mask slipped. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped the table. Fine, if you insist. But the look he shot me across that table sent chills down my spine. 2 days later, Emily and Claudia didn't show up to the Saturday ministry group, nor Sunday meeting, nor Tuesday night study. When I asked, Richard smiled coldly. Claudia's sick. Emily's caring for her. Nothing to worry about. But I did worry. Late one night, I drove past their house again. The curtains were drawn tight. But faintly, through Emily's upstairs window, I heard muffled sobbing. I parked half a block away and walked back under cover of darkness. The window was cracked open an inch. My heart pounded as I whispered, "Emily, it's me, Brother Harrison." The crying stopped. Then, slowly, a pale face appeared in the gap. Even in the dim glow of the streetlight, I saw the bruises. One eye swollen, a split lip. "He found out I talked to you," she whispered hoarsely. "He beat me. He said if I ever try to leave, he'll kill me. And he said he'll kill you too." My knees buckled. "Listen to me, Emily," I whispered fiercely. "Tomorrow morning, when he leaves for work, pack your things. Go to your Aunt Carol's on Maple Street. You remember her?" She nodded, trembling. "I'll talk to her first. You'll be safe there. Do you understand? You have to go." Her lip quivered. "What about my mom?" "I'll protect her too. But right now you need to get out." She nodded again, a flicker of hope breaking through the terror. That night I drove home shaking. I knew I'd crossed the line of no return. I wasn't just doubting an elder anymore. I was conspiring against him. And if I failed, a child could die. The next morning at dawn, I knocked on Aunt Carol's door. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, no nonsense, never married. When I told her everything, the abuse, the drugs, the bruises, her eyes filled with tears and rage. "Bring that girl here," she said. "I don't care what it costs me. I'll keep her safe." At 9:15 a.m., Emily slipped through Carol's front door carrying a backpack. Her face was blotched from crying, her arms bruised. Carol pulled her into a fierce hug. "You're safe now, baby," she whispered. I exhaled a prayer I hadn't realized I was holding, but relief was fleeting, because I knew Richard wouldn't let her go quietly. That afternoon, I drove to the Greenville Police Department. My friend, Detective Aaron Miller, met me in a back office lined with filing cabinets. "Mike, you look like hell. What's going on?" I laid the pills on his desk. I told him everything: Emily's confession, Claudia's sedation, the bruises. His face hardened as he took notes. "You understand what you're saying? This man's a respected church leader. Accusing him could get messy." "I don't care how messy it gets," I said. My voice shook, but the words were steady. "That girl deserves to live. That woman deserves to wake up. I'm not leaving until you promise me you'll act." Miller nodded slowly. "All right, we'll start an investigation. But Mike, once this begins, there's no going back. They'll turn on you." "I know," I whispered. "They already have." The morning after Emily slipped into her aunt's house, I drove around Greenville in a daze, watching the streets blur past the windshield. Spring sunlight glared off the storefront windows. Families strolled down Main Street like it was any ordinary Sunday. But to me, everything felt sharpened, brittle, as if the whole city was holding its breath. Richard didn't know yet. Or maybe he did. Either way, the clock was ticking. Detective Miller kept his word. On Tuesday, he called me into his office. The air smelled of burnt coffee and copy toner. "Mike, the DA signed off on a warrant," he said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "We're hitting the Allens' house Thursday morning. I want you there, not inside, but close enough to confirm details if needed." The word sent a jolt through me. This is real. This is happening. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Miller leaned forward. "You need to prepare yourself. If we find what Emily described, it's going to be ugly. But if we don't," "I know," I cut in. "If we don't, I'll be the one crucified." His eyes softened. "I'll stand behind you, but you'd better be ready for war inside that church." Those next 48 hours stretched like years. At the hall on Thursday night, I sat in the front row as Richard delivered a sermon about loyalty to God's appointed shepherds. His voice thundered through the sound system. His Bible slammed against the podium for emphasis. Brothers and sisters, Satan prowls around like a lion seeking to devour us. He plants seeds of doubt. He whispers lies against our elders, against the very men God has appointed to protect this flock. Will you listen to those lies, or will you trust Jehovah's arrangement? Heads nodded all around me. Some people wept openly. My stomach churned. The man standing there with polished shoes and a silk tie was the same man who bruised his daughter and drugged his wife. And yet the congregation drank in every word like water in a drought. I realized, sitting there in that sea of bowed heads, that no matter what evidence we uncovered, some people would never believe me. Thursday dawned gray and cold. At 6 a.m., I pulled my pickup into the cul-de-sac and parked half a block away. The street was still, the only sound the faint buzz of cicadas. 2 unmarked police cars rolled up silently. Officers stepped out in bulletproof vests. Miller gave me a curt nod before leading his team up the Allen's front walk. They knocked hard. "Police, open up!" No answer. After 10 seconds, they forced the door. The crack of splintering wood echoed down the street. My pulse hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. Minutes crawled by like hours. Then the radio on Miller's belt crackled. "We've got him, suspect in custody." Relief hit me like a tidal wave, but it lasted only a second before horror replaced it. 2 EMTs carried Claudia out on a stretcher. Her skin was pale as wax, her eyelids fluttering. "She's heavily sedated," one paramedic barked. "BP's low, pupils sluggish. Could have been lethal if she'd taken another dose." Behind them, 2 officers led Richard in handcuffs. His face was twisted with fury. When his eyes found me standing near the mailbox, his lips curled into a snarl. "You," he spat. "Traitor. Apostate. You think you've won? God will curse you for this." I didn't flinch. For the first time, I saw him without the veneer of holiness, just a predator stripped of his camouflage. Emily wasn't in the house. Thank God. She was safe at Carol's. Miller ordered the evidence techs to bag the pill jars from the bathroom. Inside a locked drawer in Richard's study, they found photographs that made seasoned cops turn away. My knees buckled. This was worse than I'd feared. Far worse. The fallout was immediate. By the next evening, Greenville's local news splashed the headline, "Church elder arrested for abuse and illegal drug possession." I knew what was coming even before I walked into the Kingdom Hall that Sunday. Whispers rippled through the congregation. Faces turned toward me, some with gratitude, most with suspicion. After the meeting, the elders asked me into the office. The fluorescent lights hummed as Richard's chair sat empty at the head of the table. "Brother Harrison," Sanders began, his voice heavy, "we know you were involved with the authorities." "I was," I said firmly. "You should have brought these concerns to us first. There are proper channels." "Proper channels?" I snapped. "While a child was being raped and a woman poisoned? How many channels would have kept them alive?" Silence fell. Their eyes darted between one another, but not one of them looked me straight on. Finally, Elder Green muttered, "Jehovah's organization handles matters in his time. By going to the police, you've brought reproach on the fellowship." That word again, reproach. My fists clenched. "Reproach?" I said through gritted teeth. "Tell that to Emily. Tell that to Claudia lying in a hospital bed right now. If this is what you call God's justice, I want no part of it." I left the office shaking, my ears ringing. For the first time in 15 years, I wondered if I'd ever step foot in that hall again. Outside, the sky had cleared. Families were gathering in the parking lot, exchanging small talk as if nothing earth-shattering had happened. But one figure caught my eye. Emily. She stood beside Carol, her arm wrapped in a jacket to cover bruises. When she saw me, she ran across the asphalt and hugged me so tightly it nearly knocked me over. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, but inside it burned a strength I hadn't seen before. I swallowed hard. No, Emily. You kept your courage. I just followed your lead. Carol's eyes met mine over Emily's shoulder. They brimmed with gratitude and warning. This fight isn't over, they seemed to say, and she was right. Because if the fellowship couldn't silence Richard, they'd do the next best thing. Silence me. That week I got the letter. A judicial committee will meet to discuss allegations of disloyalty and bringing reproach on the congregation. Your presence is required. The hypocrisy stung worse than a whip. Richard was in county jail awaiting trial, yet I was the one accused of betraying God. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling, then folded it back into the envelope. I knew in that moment my path had split in 2. Stay loyal to the fellowship, or stay loyal to my conscience. And once a man chooses conscience, there's no turning back. The letter lay on my kitchen table like a summons from a king. I must have read it 10 times, hoping the words would change. Your presence is required before a judicial committee to address concerns of disloyalty and reproach. They didn't mention Richard. Not once. No acknowledgement of the photographs, the pills, the bruises on Emily's face. To them, his crimes were an unfortunate embarrassment. My crime, the unforgivable one, was exposing it. My wife, Deborah, set down a mug of coffee across from me. She was quiet, too quiet. Finally, she whispered, "Mike, maybe if you just explain yourself, they'll understand." I laughed bitterly. Explain what? That I didn't want a little girl raped another night? That I didn't want a woman drugged into oblivion? You think they want to hear that? Her eyes filled with tears. Deborah had grown up in the fellowship. Her parents, her siblings, everyone we knew, all inside. For her, leaving wasn't just unthinkable, it was terrifying. "They'll disfellowship you," she said, her voice breaking. "And then what? We'll lose everyone." I reached across the table and took her hand. Better to lose everyone than lose our souls. But in truth, I wasn't as certain as I sounded. The night of the committee came fast. The hall was dark except for the elder's office, lit by one buzzing fluorescent bulb. Inside sat 3 men, Sanders, Green, and a younger elder named Phillips, who'd been silent through most of our meetings before. A table separated us, their Bibles stacked neatly, mine sitting heavy in my lap. "Brother Harrison," Sanders began, "we're here tonight to address serious concerns, namely, your decision to involve secular authorities without first consulting this body. Such actions bring reproach upon Jehovah's name and damage the reputation of his organization." My jaw clenched. "You're right about one thing. I went to the police because a child was being abused and a woman poisoned, and you all did nothing." Green leaned forward, his tone sharp. "That is an accusation against a fellow elder. Do you understand the gravity of that?" "Do you understand the gravity of what he did to his daughter?" I shot back. My voice echoed off the cinder block walls. Phillips shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Sanders sighed. "Brother Harrison, you must see that we cannot allow individuals to take matters into their own hands. If every member went to the authorities whenever they suspected wrongdoing, the congregation would be in chaos." Chaos. That word rattled in my skull. To them, chaos wasn't a child's cries or a wife's sedation. Chaos was bad headlines. I stood. My chair scraped against the tile. If protecting a child is chaos, then maybe this whole thing deserves to burn. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sanders closed his Bible with a thud. "You've made your position clear. We'll deliberate and inform you of our decision." But we all knew the decision was already made. 2 weeks later, they announced it from the stage after Sunday service. Michael Harrison is no longer one of us. That was it. No explanation, no details. Just a line that cut 15 years of my life clean in half. The room went silent. People avoided my eyes. Deborah sat stiff beside me, her face drained of color. When we walked out afterward, no one shook my hand. No one hugged her. By the next morning, my phone was dead silent. Friends I'd known for decades wouldn't answer. My in-laws stopped inviting us to dinner. Even my own brother, a deacon in another congregation, told me not to call until I repented. I had expected anger. What I hadn't expected was the suffocating loneliness. Meanwhile, the trial moved forward. Emily testified with more courage than I thought possible. Her voice trembled, but she told the court everything. The threats, the years of abuse, the nights she tried to wake her drugged mother. The jury convicted Richard on every count: child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, possession of controlled substances. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. I should have felt relief. But sitting in that courtroom, watching him led away in chains, I only felt hollow. Because while Richard was gone, the fellowship remained. And to them, I was the criminal. One evening, not long after the sentencing, I drove aimlessly through Greenville, past barbecue joints and shuttered textile mills, past neighborhoods where porch lights glowed in the warm night air. I ended up outside St. Mary's Catholic Church, a brick building I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. The doors were open. Inside, candles flickered against stained glass. A priest, older, silver-haired, was stacking hymnals. When he saw me, he smiled like I was an old friend. "You look like a man carrying a heavy load," he said gently. I almost laughed. "That obvious?" He nodded toward a pew. "Why don't you sit? Sometimes the first step to laying a burden down is letting someone else help carry it." I didn't tell him everything that night, not yet. But something about the quiet, the openness, the absence of judgment cracked something in me. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. Deborah struggled. She still attended meetings for a while, alone. Some sisters whispered that her husband had gone apostate. Others told her she'd better make a choice, soon. The pressure broke her down until one evening, she crumpled at our kitchen table and sobbed. "I can't do it anymore," she whispered. "I can't sit there and pretend." I held her, both of us crying, both realizing that walking away meant losing almost everyone we loved. But it also meant keeping each other. And for us, that had to be enough. Word spread through Greenville. Some neighbors stopped waving. Others dropped off casseroles quietly, as if afraid of being seen. At the grocery store, a woman I'd studied the Bible with years earlier cornered me near the frozen foods. "Brother Harrison," she whispered, "I don't care what they say. You did the right thing." Then she hurried away before anyone could notice. Those small moments kept me afloat. Proof that the truth, once spoken, never really dies. But the fellowship wasn't done with me. Months later, I received another letter. This one wasn't from elders. It was from the legal department at the fellowship's headquarters. They claimed I had defamed the organization by speaking to reporters, that I had violated confidentiality by disclosing internal matters. Reading those words, I realized something chilling. To them, Emily's pain was an internal matter. Claudia's poisoning was a confidentiality issue. I tore the letter in half and fed it to the garbage disposal. But inside, I knew this battle wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about an entire system that valued its image above its children. And I wasn't going to stay silent. After the trial and the disfellowshipping, life slowed to a crawl. I used to wake up with a full calendar: meetings, visits, ministry work, elder duties. Now my mornings stretched empty, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a weight. Deborah tried to fill the void with small routines. She baked cornbread, scrubbed the counters until they gleamed, replanted flowers in the yard. But no matter what we did, the air inside our home felt different, like something sacred had been torn out by the roots. I thought the worst part would be losing friends. It wasn't. The worst part was how invisible we became. At the grocery store, people I'd known for decades would turn their carts down another aisle. At the gas station, fellowship members who once hugged me would suddenly be too busy checking their tires. Even my niece's high school graduation, Deborah and I sat in the bleachers, while her entire row of fellowship relatives stood and left the moment they saw us. That kind of silence cuts deeper than any insult. One evening, a month after Richard's sentencing, Deborah found me on the back porch staring at the dark trees. "You're not sleeping again," she said softly. I shrugged. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. Emily, standing there, begging for help. And then I hear them, the elders, telling me I brought reproach. Deborah sat beside me, folding her hands in her lap. Do you ever wonder if maybe they were right? Not about him, but about us leaving. What if we're really outside of God's favor now? Her words pierced me. I wanted to reassure her, to give her certainty. But the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I wonder every day, I admitted. But if God's favor means turning away from a crying child, then maybe I don't want it. She leaned her head on my shoulder, silent tears running down her cheeks. It was around that time I found myself drawn back to St. Mary's. I started small, sitting in the last pew on quiet afternoons when no one else was there. The building smelled of old wood and melted wax. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, painting the walls in crimson and gold. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without performing. One day, the same silver-haired priest spotted me again. "You've been visiting often," he said gently. I nodded. "This place, it feels safe." He sat beside me in the pew. Safe is good, but God doesn't just want us safe, He wants us whole. I almost laughed. Wholeness feels a long way off. Maybe, but wholeness starts with telling the truth, even when it costs you everything. His words sank into me like water into dry soil. He didn't know my story, but somehow he'd named it. Still, old habits die hard. One Saturday morning, a pair of fellowship members knocked on my door, 2 men I'd trained years ago. They stood stiff on my porch, Bibles tucked under their arms. "Brother Harrison," one began formally, "we wanted to remind you that the door to Jehovah's organization is never closed. If you're willing to repent, the elders will hear you." I stared at them, memories crashing like waves. Long car rides, hours spent rehearsing scriptures, prayers shared before knocking on strangers' doors. "Repent?" I said quietly. "For what? For saving a child? For stopping a man from poisoning his wife?" The younger one shifted uneasily, but the older pressed on. "For undermining God's arrangement? For speaking to outsiders about matters that belong inside the congregation?" Something in me snapped. "You want to know what belongs inside?" I hissed. "Her screams, her bruises, those pills. That's what belonged inside. But you turned away. And you dare come here and ask me to repent?" They stepped back, shaken. "We'll pray for you," one muttered. Then they left, their polished shoes clicking down the walk. I stood in the doorway long after they'd gone, my chest heaving. I wasn't angry at them, not really. They were just repeating the script we'd all been trained to follow. But I knew then there was no going back. Emily thrived slowly at her aunt's. The bruises faded. She enrolled in a new school, joined choir, even started smiling again. One afternoon, she and Carol came by with homemade peach cobbler. Emily sat at our kitchen table, humming softly as she spooned ice cream onto her plate. "Brother Harrison," she said shyly, "the judge asked if I wanted to write a victim statement. I told him yes. And I told him, I wouldn't have survived if you hadn't believed me." Tears stung my eyes. "You saved yourself, Emily. I just listened." "No," she said firmly, meeting my gaze with surprising strength. "Nobody else listened, not even the people who were supposed to protect me. You did." That moment was both healing and haunting. Healing because she was alive, smiling. Haunting because I couldn't stop thinking how many Emilys were still out there. The fellowship made sure to remind me of my exile. Letters from headquarters, rumors filtering through neighbors. I became a warning story. Don't be like Brother Harrison, or you'll lose everything. But something else happened too. Quietly, cautiously, people began reaching out. One night, a man I hadn't seen in years called from a payphone. His voice shook. "Mike, it's David. I heard what you did. My daughter, she's been saying some things. I don't know who else to trust." I closed my eyes. Another child, another family. That's when I realized my fight wasn't over. It had only begun. The next Sunday, I sat again in St. Mary's, this time not hiding in the back. Deborah came with me, her hand clutching mine. We sang softly, stumbling through unfamiliar hymns. Yet when the congregation's voices rose together, I felt something stir inside me. Not fear, not duty, but hope. Afterward, the priest shook our hands warmly. "Welcome home," he said simply. It startled me. Home. I hadn't felt at home in years. Driving back through Greenville's winding streets, Deborah squeezed my hand. "Maybe," she whispered. "God isn't smaller than one organization." For the first time, I allowed myself to believe she might be right. By the time summer settled over Greenville, the cicadas were so loud at night it felt like the trees themselves were vibrating. I'd sit out on the back porch with a glass of sweet tea, listening to the hum and wondering how life had gone so wrong so fast, and yet how it had also brought me to the one truth I couldn't deny. Emily was safe. That single fact kept me going. But safety is a fragile thing when you've crossed an empire. It started with phone calls, unknown numbers ringing at all hours. When I picked up, silence. Other times, a single voice, "Traitor." Then a click. One morning, Deborah found a pamphlet stuffed in our mailbox, a fellowship tract with the words scrawled across the cover, "The end will reveal the wicked." We tried to brush it off as paranoia, but then our mailbox was smashed in with a baseball bat. A few days later, someone spray-painted "apostate" across the side of my pickup truck. I knew Richard still had loyalists, men who couldn't fathom that their spiritual hero was a predator. And to them, I wasn't just a man, I was the embodiment of betrayal. Meanwhile, I kept hearing whispers of other children. David, the man who'd called from a payphone, finally showed up at my house one night. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette on my porch. "My daughter, Lily," he said, voice low. "She's been telling me things. About Brother Jacobs, another elder. Says he touched her during Bible study." I didn't know who else to believe. "They told me I'd ruin her life if I went to the police." The words punched me in the gut. Another one. Another man hiding behind scripture and a pressed shirt. "David," I said firmly, "you listen to me. Your daughter's life isn't ruined by telling the truth. It's ruined by silence." He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then slowly, he nodded. That night, I drove with him to the police station. Detective Miller was still on call. When he saw me walk in again, his eyebrows shot up. "Mike, tell me you're not bringing me another one." "I wish I wasn't," I said, "but you need to hear this." Miller exhaled heavily, then motioned us inside. The investigation into Jacobs dragged on for months. And with every step, the fellowship grew more hostile. At the grocery store, whispers followed me down the aisles. At the diner, old friends got up and left their booths when I walked in. One evening, Deborah's sister slammed the door in her face, shouting through the screen, "You chose him over God. Don't come back." Deborah broke down in the car, her hands gripping the steering wheel like she wanted to crush it. "I don't care about me," she sobbed, "but my own family, my own sister." I held her hand. "They'll understand someday. Maybe not soon, but someday." I didn't believe my own words, but sometimes hope is all a person has to give. Emily grew stronger, though scars lingered. She started high school at a public school in town. At first, she kept her head down, shy, fearful of anyone in authority. But slowly, she opened up. She joined choir, then the debate team. One afternoon, she stopped by with Carol. She looked me straight in the eye, her voice steady. "I'm writing about what happened, for English class. Not details, just about finding my voice. Is that okay?" I swallowed hard. "It's more than okay. It's brave." She smiled faintly. "I don't ever want anyone else to feel like they can't speak." Her words lit a fire in me, because that's exactly what the fellowship wanted. Silence. The fellowship wasn't blind to my defiance. They escalated. One Sunday morning, a letter was read aloud from the stage at the hall. "Beware of those who have gone out from us, for they are not of us. Do not even greet such ones. They are like the dog that returns to its vomit." I knew they meant me. Everyone did. That afternoon, while mowing my lawn, a car slowed in front of my house. The driver leaned out and shouted, "You'll get yours, Harrison!" Then sped off. I shut the mower off and stood in the still air, sweat dripping down my back. Fear clawed at me, but underneath it was something else. Defiance. I wasn't backing down. My anchor became St. Mary's. Deborah and I started attending Sunday Mass regularly. At first, it felt strange, the liturgy, the incense, the kneeling. But the community was warm. No one asked about our past. No one shunned us. One night after Mass, Father James, that silver-haired priest, invited us to stay for coffee. "Michael," he said, "you've walked through fire, but don't let fire define you. What do you believe God wants from you now?" I thought about it for a long moment. I think He wants me to protect the ones nobody else will. Father James smiled gently. "Then that is your calling, and it's holy." I began to share my story quietly. At first, just with small groups, recovery circles, support meetings, church gatherings. My hands shook the first time I stood up to speak. I expected judgment, suspicion. Instead, I saw tears, nods, people leaning forward, hungry for honesty. Afterward, a woman approached me. "My brother went through something similar," she said. "I've never heard anyone talk about it so openly. Thank you." For the first time since it all began, I felt something shift inside me. Not just survival, purpose. But with purpose came danger. Late one night, I returned home from a meeting to find our living room window shattered. Glass crunched under my boots as I stepped inside. On the floor lay a brick wrapped in paper, scrawled in black marker, "Shut your mouth or else." Deborah stood behind me, trembling. "Mike, what if they're serious?" I picked up the brick, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "They are serious," I said, "but so am I." I set the brick on the counter like a trophy. They could threaten me, they could isolate me, but they would not silence me. The brick through the window should have scared me into silence. That's what they were counting on. Instead, it did the opposite. I stood in my living room that night, glass crunching underfoot, Deborah shaking beside me, and I thought, if they're this desperate to shut me up, then the truth must be louder than I realized. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't just going to protect Emily, or David's little girl, or whoever came next. I was going to rip the lid off the whole rotten system. The first step was telling my story in public. Father James arranged for me to speak at a parish hall one Wednesday night. I was terrified. I'd spoken to hundreds before as an elder, but this was different. Back then, I'd had a script, a system, an audience trained to nod along. Now I had only my truth, raw, messy, vulnerable. The room filled with maybe 50 people, survivors, parents, curious neighbors. The air smelled of coffee and folding chairs. My hands trembled as I took the microphone. I was an elder in what we called the fellowship. I began, my voice rough. For 15 years I believed I was serving God. But what I really served was a machine that protected predators and silenced children. A hush fell. Faces leaned forward. I told them about Emily, about Claudia's sedation, about the pills, about the committee that disfellowshipped me for calling the police. I didn't spare myself either. I should have seen the signs sooner, I admitted. I should have spoken sooner, and I'll carry that guilt to my grave. But I won't carry silence anymore. By the end, my throat burned. But when I lowered the mic, the room erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, real, raw, desperate applause. Afterward, people lined up to talk. Some hugged me. Some whispered their own stories of abuse, betrayal, silence. A woman in her 40s clutched my hand and said, "I thought I was crazy all these years. You just proved I wasn't." Walking out of that hall, for the first time in decades, I felt free. But the fellowship didn't stay quiet. The very next Sunday, Greenville's Hall read a special letter from headquarters, a so-called warning letter. I wasn't there, but a neighbor told me later what it said. Certain individuals in this community have been spreading lies against Jehovah's organization. These apostates seek to draw away the faithful, just as Satan misled Eve. Avoid them completely. Do not read their words. Do not listen to their speeches. Do not greet them, for their words are poison. Poison. That word found me even at the grocery store. A woman from the hall glared at me over a row of canned beans. "Poison," she hissed under her breath before storming away. I could have crumbled under that. But instead, I thought of Emily's essay for class about finding her voice. If she could stand in front of her peers and tell the truth, so could I. Local news picked up the story again. Channel 7 sent a reporter to my house, a young woman named Melissa with a notebook and tired eyes. "Mr. Harrison," she asked, "why come forward now?" I looked straight at her camera. "Because silence kills, and because this community deserves to know that men in positions of spiritual power use that power to destroy lives. If the fellowship wants to call me poison for saying that, so be it." The segment aired that night. Within days, my inbox was full. Some messages were threats, sure, but many were thanks. Survivors from across South Carolina, a mother from Atlanta, even a man from Texas who'd read about the case online. "You're not alone," they wrote. "Please don't stop." Deborah was my rock through it all. At first, she'd been afraid, terrified of losing her family, her identity. But as she sat through meetings at St. Mary's, something softened in her. One evening after Mass, as we walked out under the glow of the streetlights, she squeezed my hand. "You know what I realized tonight?" she said. "What?" "I used to think holiness meant following rules, but maybe it just means loving people enough to protect them. You've been doing that all along, even when it cost you everything." Her words undid me. Right there on the church steps, tears spilled down my face. But with every new step forward, the fellowship sharpened its knives. A week after the TV segment, I came home to find a letter taped to my door. This one wasn't scripture. It was legal. A cease and desist from the fellowship's lawyers. They threatened to sue for defamation, to bankrupt me if I kept speaking publicly. I sat at the kitchen table, reading it over and over. "They're trying to scare you," Deborah whispered. "It's working," I admitted. My chest tightened. We barely scraped by as it was. A lawsuit could destroy us. I called Miller. He listened quietly, then said, "Mike, this is textbook intimidation. They know the optics of dragging you into court would look bad. But if you keep speaking, you'd better be ready for a fight." Was I ready? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't go back to silence. Emily gave me the push I needed. She stopped by one Saturday afternoon, now taller, stronger, her voice carrying a confidence that hadn't been there before. "Uncle Mike," she said. She'd started calling me that lately. "I saw you on TV. I'm proud of you." I blinked back tears. "You don't know how much that means." She shook her head. "No, you don't know how much it means. I thought no one would ever believe me. But you did, and now everyone knows. You gave me my life back." That settled it. Whatever the fellowship threw at me, I wasn't backing down. Father James introduced me to a national advocacy group, survivors, whistleblowers, allies. They invited me to speak at a conference in Atlanta. I almost said no. Who was I to stand on a stage with real activists, real leaders? But when I walked into that conference hall, saw hundreds of people, men, women, even teenagers, carrying signs that read, "Protect the children, not the institution," I knew I belonged. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium. Lights blinded me. My heart pounded. "My name is Michael Harrison," I said. "I was an elder in the fellowship for 15 years, and I'm here to tell you, the cover-ups are real, the abuse is real, and the silence they demand will kill us if we let it." The crowd roared, not with anger but with recognition, with solidarity, and for the first time since my baptism in that little Greenville congregation so many years ago, I felt something holy, not fear, not control, but truth. Atlanta lit something inside me that I didn't know had survived all those years of silence. Fire. When I stood in that conference hall, voices rising in applause, banners overhead demanding justice, I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It never had been. I was just one of thousands. Survivors, parents, whistleblowers, all carrying scars, all carrying truths too heavy to bear alone. For the first time, I felt less like a man drowning and more like a soldier joining an army. The media noticed. 2 weeks after Atlanta, a national paper ran a piece. Ex-elder speaks out against fellowship cover-ups. They printed my name, my face, my story. By the time I woke up the morning, it hit newsstands. My phone was already buzzing with messages. Some were hate. You're Satan's pawn. You'll burn. Others were desperate thanks. You gave me courage. I thought I was alone. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through message after message until Deborah touched my arm. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. But the fellowship wasn't about to let me go unpunished. Within days, their lawyers filed motions accusing me of slander. The local congregation released a statement to the press. Michael Harrison is a disgruntled former member who seeks attention by spreading falsehoods. The fellowship does not tolerate abuse and handles all matters internally in harmony with Scripture. Internally. That word turned my stomach. Internally meant in secret. Internally meant silencing victims, shielding predators, shaming truth-tellers. I wanted to shout back in the papers, on TV, anywhere they'd listen. But Miller warned me. They'll bury you in paperwork if you're not careful, he said. They don't need to win in court. They just need to wear you out. I nodded, but I already knew. I wasn't backing down. The backlash turned ugly on the ground, too. One morning, Deborah found a dead possum nailed to our fence post. A note pinned to its fur read, Judas. She gagged, covering her mouth. I pulled it down, hands shaking with fury. That night I sat on the porch with a shotgun across my lap. I'd grown up hunting deer in the Carolina woods. I knew how to use it. But this wasn't about hunting. This was about drawing a line. If they wanted to scare me, they'd have to look me in the eye. Meanwhile, Emily kept blossoming. She came home one day with a ribbon from her school debate tournament. She beamed as she showed me. I argued about protecting whistleblowers, she said, grinning. Guess who I thought of the whole time? Tears blurred my vision. Emily, you're stronger than I'll ever be. She shook her head. I'm strong because you believed me. Moments like that made every threat, every sleepless night worth it. Deborah's transformation deepened too. She no longer flinched at Mass. She sang louder during hymns, her voice steady, her eyes bright. One Sunday after service, she pulled Father James aside. I want to be baptized, she told him. Not because I'm running from something, because I'm finally running towards something. Watching her stand there, shoulders straight, tears in her eyes, it was like seeing a woman reborn. I hadn't realized how heavy her silence had been until she let it go. Then came the invitation I never expected, a producer from a national talk show. They wanted me to sit down for a televised interview, prime time, millions watching. I almost said no. The idea of exposing myself that widely made my stomach churn. But Deborah squeezed my hand. Think of Emily. Think of Lily. Think of the ones who haven't spoken yet. So I said yes. The studio lights were blinding. The host asked gentle but firm questions. Why had I spoken out? What had I seen inside the fellowship? What had it cost me? I told the truth. Every word of it. My voice cracked when I spoke about Emily, about Claudia, about the moment I found those blue pills. When the segment aired, my inbox exploded again, not just from survivors, but from attorneys, lawmakers, journalists, people who wanted to dig deeper, to expose more. The fellowship responded with fury. Their legal team sent another letter, this one threatening severe financial consequences if I continued libelous statements. I crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. I'd lived under fear long enough. But fame, even the unwanted kind, comes at a price. Paparazzi showed up outside my house. Reporters called my job until my boss finally let me go, too tired of the attention. Bills piled up. Deborah took extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. One night, I sat staring at overdue notices, my chest tight. Maybe they win, I muttered. Maybe they grind us down until we can't stand anymore. Deborah touched my cheek. They win if you quit. They lose if you keep telling the truth. Her faith in me outstripped my own. The pressure finally broke one evening in the strangest of places. The confessional at St. Mary's. I hadn't planned to go in. I wasn't Catholic, Not formally, but Father James encouraged me. So I slipped into the wooden booth, the screen between us, the smell of polished oak filling my lungs. "My sin is silence," I whispered. For too long, I looked away. I trusted men who didn't deserve it. I let children suffer because I was afraid, and even now I wonder if I'm strong enough to keep going. There was a long pause. Then Father James's voice, soft but steady. "Your silence is broken. That is no longer your sin. Now your calling is to be a voice for those who cannot speak. That is not a burden. It is grace." For the first time in years, I didn't feel shame. I felt peace. That peace was tested the very next week. Detective Miller called. "Mike, brace yourself. We've found more. Records, letters. They show senior fellowship leaders knew about multiple cases, not just in Greenville, but across the state. They moved predators from one congregation to another, covered it all up." My stomach turned. "How many cases?" "Too many," he said grimly, "and they're not going to go down without a fight." As I hung up, I realized this wasn't a battle for one city anymore. It was a war for the soul of an entire institution, and I was already too deep to turn back. By autumn, Greenville no longer felt like home. The streets I'd driven for 20 years, past the old textile mills, the barbecue joints, the ball fields where I'd coached Little League, all carried new weight. Everywhere I went, eyes followed me, some full of quiet gratitude, others burning with hatred. I was no longer Michael Harrison, husband, mechanic, neighbor. I was Michael Harrison, the apostate elder. To some, a hero. To others, a traitor. And to the fellowship, I was now their enemy number one. The lawsuits came first. A thick packet delivered by courier. Harrison v. The Fellowship of Greenville et al. They accused me of slander, defamation, malicious falsehoods intended to damage the reputation of a sacred institution. Their lawyers demanded damages in the millions, more money than I'd ever seen, more than I could ever hope to pay. Deborah found me at the kitchen table that night, staring at the stack of papers. "Mike," she whispered, "this could ruin us." I nodded, unable to speak. She sat down, gripping my hand. "We've already lost everything but the truth. If they take our house, our savings, they still can't take that." Her strength shamed me. I'd always been the one to protect her, but in that moment, she was the shield. Then came the smear campaign. A blog appeared online, clearly run by fellowship loyalists, claiming I'd fabricated Emily's story for attention. They twisted facts, painted me as a bitter ex-member hungry for fame. The ugliest lie, that I'd coached Emily to accuse her father. I read that line and felt bile rise in my throat. I wanted to punch through the computer screen. Instead, I closed the laptop and drove straight to Carol's house. Emily opened the door, taller now, her braces gone, her eyes steady. "What's wrong, Uncle Mike?" I knelt down in the doorway, voice shaking. "They're saying awful things, Emily, about you, about me. I need you to know none of it matters. I believe you. Always." She tilted her head, then smiled faintly. "I know. They're scared. That's why they're lying. Because the truth hurts worse than anything." Her calm steadied me more than anything else could. Meanwhile, Miller kept digging. He showed me files recovered from a fellowship office across the state. Internal letters, confidential notes. They documented case after case, elders caught with minors, quietly reassigned. Victims told to forgive and forget. Parents threatened with disfellowshipping if they went to the police. "This isn't just Greenville," Miller said grimly. "This is everywhere. You realize what you've stepped into, right?" I nodded. My chest tightened, but my voice was firm. "I realize I can't back out now." But the weight of it nearly broke me one night. I sat alone in the garage, the smell of motor oil clinging to my clothes. My old Bible sat on the workbench, its leather cover worn soft from years of use. I opened it, but the words swam on the page. Verses I'd once preached with fire now felt like ashes. "God," I whispered into the silence, "where are you? Did I lose you when I walked out of that hall? Or are you still here, buried under all this noise. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time, I admitted the fear that haunted me. What if they were right? What if I had walked away from salvation? The silence stretched until I heard Deborah's footsteps. She wrapped her arms around me from behind, her cheek against my shoulder. "You didn't walk away from God," she whispered. "You walked away from men who pretended to own him." Her words cracked something open in me, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. The lawsuit dragged me into depositions. Long hours in stuffy conference rooms with fellowship lawyers firing questions at me, their voices slick with contempt. "Mr. Harrison, isn't it true you bear a personal grudge against the fellowship because of your disfellowshipping?" "No. I bear a grudge against predators who hide behind religion." "Isn't it true your wife remains conflicted about leaving, suggesting your household is divided?" "My wife's faith is stronger than ever." "Stronger than yours if it means defending child rapists." They bristled, but I didn't care. If they wanted a fight, they had one. Money tightened. With me out of work and Deborah's nursing shifts stretched thin, bills stacked up. We sold our second car, cut back on groceries. There were nights I went to bed hungry so she could eat. But then envelopes started arriving, unmarked, slipped into our mailbox, postmarked from all over the country. Inside were small checks, letters of encouragement. Survivors who had seen my interview, strangers who wanted us to keep going. "You gave me hope. Use this to keep speaking. Don't stop now." Those notes kept the lights on, literally. And then came the breaking point. One night, as Deborah and I drove home from Mass, headlights flared behind us. A truck, too close. It swerved, tailgating, then roared up beside us on the dark country road. A window rolled down. A bottle flew, shattering across our windshield. Deborah screamed. I swerved hard, tires screeching on the asphalt. The truck sped off into the night. We pulled over, shaking. Glass glittered across the dashboard. "They're trying to kill us," Deborah whispered, her voice raw with terror. I gripped her hand. My own fear burned hot. But underneath it was something harder, stronger. "They can't kill the truth," I said. "Not now. Not ever." Days later, I stood once more at St. Mary's, sunlight spilling through stained glass, bathing the pews in crimson and gold. Emily sat beside Carol. Deborah held my hand. Father James spoke about courage, how real faith isn't proven in comfort, but in fire. And I realized the fellowship could sue me, slander me, even try to run me off the road, but they couldn't touch the one thing that mattered. The fire that had been lit the moment Emily whispered her secret beneath that dogwood tree. That fire wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to every survivor, every child, every parent who refused to be silenced. And I swore, right there, I'd carry it as far as I could, no matter what it cost. The courthouse smelled of paper and fear. By winter, the fellowship's lawsuits against me had snowballed into a full trial. Not small-town whispers anymore. This was state court. Reporters crowding the steps, cameras flashing as Deborah and I walked in. She wore her nurse's scrubs, fresh off an overnight shift, refusing to be intimidated by suits and ties. Inside, their lawyers sat polished and smug, armed with binders thick enough to crush a man. They wanted blood. What they didn't expect was that I wasn't standing there alone anymore. The trial stretched for weeks. Every day I sat at the defendant's table, listening as they called me bitter, unstable, power-hungry. They projected my face onto a screen and dissected every word I'd ever said, every interview, every speech. But then came the witnesses. Emily, now 15, stood before the jury. Her voice trembled at first, but when she looked over at me, her eyes steadied. "My father hurt me," she said. "He drugged my mother. And when I told the elders, they told me to stay quiet. The only one who believed me was Mr. Harrison. If he hadn't gone to the police, I wouldn't be alive today." The courtroom was silent. Even the fellowship's lawyers looked rattled. Then David took the stand. His daughter Lily testified too, voice shaking as she described Brother Jacobs. Piece by piece, the truth filled that sterile room until it was undeniable. The fellowship's lawyers fought dirty. They tried to paint Emily as coached, Lily as confused, me as a disgruntled ex-member. But every time they attacked, the evidence piled higher. The files Miller unearthed, the letters showing cover-ups across the state, the photographs no one could stomach. By the time closing arguments came, I wasn't afraid anymore. My lawyer stood and said simply, "You've heard the children. You've seen the documents. This case isn't about Michael Harrison's reputation. It's about an organization that protected predators and punished truth-tellers. Today you decide whether silence wins." The jury deliberated only 4 hours. When they filed back in, my heart thudded so loud I could barely hear the foreman's words. Verdict in favor of the defendant. I collapsed into Deborah's arms. The fellowship had lost. Outside, cameras swarmed. Reporters shoved microphones at me, asking if I felt vindicated, if I planned to sue them in return. All I could say was, this was never about me. It was about the kids, and about making sure no one else has to suffer in silence again. That clip ran on national news that night, and just like that, the fellowship's carefully polished facade cracked wide open. The aftermath was chaos. State investigators launched inquiries. Survivors flooded hotlines. Within months, congregations across South Carolina faced scrutiny. Some elders resigned. Others doubled down, denouncing the courts, blaming satanic lies. But the tide had turned. For once, survivors weren't whispering in the shadows. They were stepping into the light. At home, life was still hard. Bills didn't vanish overnight. Deborah worked double shifts. I picked up mechanic jobs where I could, rebuilding engines in dim garages. But there was a new rhythm now, a lighter air. Emily visited often, her laughter filling the house. Lily came too sometimes, quieter, still healing, but safe. Our kitchen table became a kind of refuge, plates of Deborah's cornbread, stories swapped, hope stitched together bite by bite. It wasn't the family I'd lost, but it was the family I needed. One Sunday morning, nearly a year after Richard's arrest, Father James baptized Deborah in the font at St. Mary's. The congregation clapped, sunlight pouring through stained glass, her face glowing with peace I hadn't seen in years. Afterward, she turned to me, water still glistening on her hair. "Mike, you should come in too." I smiled, tears in my eyes. "Someday, I will. But today's yours." I wasn't ready yet. My faith was still fragile, scarred. But I knew now it wasn't gone. God had never belonged to the fellowship. He'd been here all along, in Emily's courage, in Deborah's strength, in every stranger who slipped a letter into my mailbox. Months later, I stood under that same dogwood tree where Emily had first whispered her secret to me. The blossoms had returned, white and delicate against the Carolina sky. I closed my eyes and heard her voice again, trembling with fear, begging me not to tell. And then I heard her voice now. Strong, clear, unafraid. That was the arc of everything, from silence to song, from shadow to light. Life isn't simple now. The fellowship still exists. People still glare at me in town. Some wounds will never fully heal. But when Emily graduates high school, I'll be there. When Lily sings in choir, I'll be in the front row. And when another survivor finds the courage to speak, I'll stand beside them, no matter the cost. Because I know now, truth isn't just a weapon, it's a calling, and I'll spend the rest of my days answering it.